this is going to be, I think, a monumental time frame for the company. The work that we're doing on these 100% owned licenses without partners' direction, I think is going to be fundamental to the development of the company. And I think it's just the starting point. So we've got, based on these results, we have significant plans for round two, and then obviously as directed by the results. But we certainly have lots on the horizon, not just in these three targets, but I could say I'm just as excited about the next three on our list as well.
So thanks for tuning in, everyone. I'm sitting down today with Stephen Burega, CEO of Angkor Resources. Stephen, it's your first time on the show. I'm happy to have you join us. How are you doing today?
You're doing great. Thanks so much for having me today.
And are you staying warm in the whole polar vortex situation?
Indeed. Toronto's not so bad. Not quite like the prairies, but no, we're doing just fine. Thanks very much for asking.
I'm guessing you're doing a little better than -40.
Indeed, quite a bit better.
Okay. Well, this is your first time on the show, and I think there's a good chance that a lot of people that'll be watching won't have heard of your company before. So I think to start off, maybe give us a high-level overview of the company and what is it that Angkor Resources does.
Sure. It's really interesting. I think Cambodia is probably one of those regions in the world where it's still relatively unknown. So my guess is that a lot of your audience might consider Cambodia and equate it with travel. Southeast Asia has been, a hotbed for world travelers, especially Cambodia, over recent years. But the really amazing thing is that Cambodia has spectacular geology to go with an amazing culture, amazing people, and beautiful wonders of the world like Angkor Wat. So, we started in Cambodia in 2008 as a private company. We IPO'd in 2011. But when we first arrived in Cambodia, it was a different place altogether. From a infrastructure perspective, when we first started driving up to our properties from Phnom Penh, it used to take us 2.5 hours on dirt roads. Today, it's a 4-lane highway to and from Ban Lung, and it takes us about 7.5 hours door to door. So that's just an example of how things have changed, and infrastructure has become significantly improved. But it doesn't just stop there. I mean, you're looking at a country in Cambodia that is growing faster than anywhere else in Southeast Asia. You're seeing more foreign direct investment coming into the country than anywhere else. You're seeing infrastructure development, major players coming to the table. I mean, the largest bank in Phnom Penh in Cambodia is called the ABA Bank, and it's actually owned by the National Bank of Canada. You've got accounting groups like PwC setting up regional offices. Manulife has set up a regional office. If you just look at the landscape of Phnom Penh today than it was even 5 years ago in comparison, it's really quite spectacular how it's grown and how it's developed. And you've got an environment supported by a government that is looking to see growth continue. So you've got average GDP growth of over 7% annually. As I mentioned, excuse me, you have more foreign direct investment coming in from the neighborhood. And your neighbors are serious players. So you've got India, China, Korea, Japan. I mean, you've got a marketplace, a very willing investor environment, and all the geology that you would expect to see and want to see in a developing region, and very few players. So we feel very fortunate that we're there, and we are able to leverage our 12 years of experience and in building and redefining the real understanding of what the geology has to offer. When we first arrived in Cambodia, we were working off of maps that were 50 years old plus. And within our first 1.5 to 2 years, we identified our first copper porphyries in a region that previously had been expected not to be able to support porphyry production or porphyry showings, intrusions. So it's that old adage, geology doesn't respect borders. and you have production happening all around Cambodia. You have large-scale gold operations, base metal operations, oil and gas operations, both onshore and offshore, and very little happening in country. So, we're happy to be there, and I'm really excited today to be able to tell your audience about the work that we're doing this upcoming work season, and maybe to provide even more detail on our past history that gives us the reasons why we think Cambodia is so spectacular.
Well, that was a great overview, Stephen. And I think all this information is important because when you invest, in a company like Angkor, you're not just investing in the company, you're investing in the country. Cambodia certainly wasn't on my radar prior, to doing a little bit of due diligence on your company. Can you walk us through a little bit? You touched on it, but what's the regulatory regime there like? And what about, say taxation and royalty?
Perfect. Cambodia was in a fortuitous position. They were able to look at their neighborhood. So look at Thailand, Laos, Vietnam, Indonesia. Look at how these countries had applied rules and regulations and guidelines in their respective resource sectors. And I think that they did a very good job of identifying potential pitfalls and being able to move around and leapfrog over those because of the experience that they could draw on from the neighborhood. Mm-hmm. So on the hard rock, specifically on the hard rock side, so looking at the precious metals and at the base metals side of things, Cambodia chose to basically use the Western Australian Mining Code as their base for developing the mining code in Cambodia. So It's very straightforward. It's very easy for us to understand. As North American exploration company coming in, it's a very simple, straightforward system. And they've applied very reasonable expectations of what annual expenditures should be. So they're building a marketplace that can support international investment. And that's vitally important, especially with a country that's so young and in an environment that is, just beginning to show the fruits of some of the labors that ourselves as one of the very first exploration companies in country, as well as some of our partners, Australian groups like Emerald Resources that are bringing on their 1 million ounce deposit just south of us. They're going to be pouring gold for the first time in Cambodian history, and a modern day mine is coming online, and they're going to be pouring gold in Q2. So from a regulatory perspective, the hard rock is very straightforward, as I say, Western Australian Mining Code. And then on the oil and gas side, their production sharing contract is extremely well done. They've applied international standards. This is a document that is bankable. They could take this to an IFC type conversation, and they would say, it check marks all the boxes that you would expect to see. So they've done a very good job of laying the groundwork. And now we need to do the work to be able to find some of these world-class assets and bring them forward. You asked a question about the taxation system, and I'll speak briefly about it. Again, it's straightforward. So they have a flat 30% income tax in country, and they take a 3% royalty on precious metals. Okay. The other really important thing, John, just to mention while we're talking about this, is that there's no expectation of partnership. So we don't have any hidden partners on our licenses. We own them 100% outright. We don't have any local partners. We're not mandated to do so. So again, another example of how it's very straightforward to be able to operate in country.
Okay, so these are all good things. You mentioned you've been around for a while, or Angkor has been around in the country for a while. Do you think that there's an advantage to having been in Cambodia since the early days, like in terms of the relationships you have with the government and the locals? It sounds like there's a lot more attention coming on the country now, but is there a first mover advantage that you think the company has here?
I 100% I believe that to be the case. So, we approached Cambodia with a very specific goal in mind, and that was to do business differently. Cambodia has unfortunately had a very difficult past. And you always have to remember that Cambodia is just 40 years young. And the reason I say that, because it was only 40 years ago where Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge were still in power. So you've got a country that has had to get through some very significant issues over the years. And I think they've done an exceptional job in building out that understanding internationally that they are open for business, that they are a safe jurisdiction, and they have moved the bar forward significantly over that time frame to build a marketplace that allows for international investment to come to the table. Having been there now for the past 12 years, we have seen a lot of that movement, that change, and we've been lucky enough to be part of that conversation throughout. So we've been able to help guide some of these conversations as they develop their guidelines and mining codes, et cetera, and be at the table in overall conversation. It's nice when the prime minister of the country will refer to you by name. I think that speaks volumes to the type of work we've done. And there's been times where the prime minister has said, be more like Angkor. Do more about committing to your community, to committing to the people around you. It's not just about identification and profiting. It's about seeing that you do leave a positive footprint behind with people that you're operating that are affected by your operations. And we've kept that at heart since day one. We've been asked to present at the United Nations over the years because we have such an inclusive approach to social license. Mm-hmm. It's a priority for us. We do great geological work. We have world-class team on the ground, but we also have relationships with all of the local communities, all the way up to the top of the government levels. And that affords us the opportunity to operate in this environment. And I think it speaks to part of the reason why we were able to successfully acquire the right to the Block 8, which is in the oil and gas side, which we'll speak to, I'm sure, a little bit later on in our conversation.
Well, it's pretty impressive when the prime minister can refer to you by name, and the fact that he's telling other people to be more like your company. It obviously says a lot about the way that your whole team has approached this. I mean, social license is pretty important. I think so many people now understand the importance of having that community support, especially in mineral exploration and development. Comes in pretty handy to have the backing of the the people around you. So yeah, that's Absolutely. Really great news. And I think as a whole, it just it's clear that places like Cambodia, it's not on a lot of people's radar. That sounds like it's obviously changing, but I think in general, areas like this that are sort of newer, in relative terms, newer for investment, there's always opportunity that comes with getting into the, these kind of areas first or early in the game.
Absolutely agreed. And, when we arrived as I mentioned, in 2008, that was a tough time in the world, the North American market and the world market. There was a lot of groups like OzMin that were in country at the time, and they were leaving. So we were able to acquire some of our earliest licenses at an extremely favorable price model because we were able to buy these things outright and at a time when they were at an all-time low. And then being the group that has done this work the most over the years, we have an exceptional understanding of the geology, of the lay of the land. And that puts us in a particularly fortuitous position as we move forward.
Okay. So speaking of the geology, I think now is probably a good time to start, looking at your key property holdings. So just as an overview, I don't think we maybe mentioned it directly earlier, but Angkor has two sides to the business. One is the hard rock exploration side, primarily looking at gold, and the other side is your oil and gas exploration, which we'll get to in a little bit. But let's start on the hard rock side. If you could give us an overview of your key property holdings, and maybe not too much detail for this first interview, just an overview, and we'll probably do a follow-up, a little deeper dive, but just an overview of your key property holdings.
Okay. Well, there's a map. Oh, there we go. So that map shows the 5 core licenses that we have on the hard rock side. That there's an inset in that map which shows our logo in the northeast quadrant of the country, vis-a-vis where Laos is in Vietnam and Thailand. Now, we're going to be working this year on two particular licenses. So if you look at that map, and you'll see there's a blue license to the north, and it's called Andong. Again, 100% owned. We don't have any partnership on the Andong license. And then to the due south, to the very bottom of that map, you'll see a green license, and that one's called Nheak. We're focusing on these two particular licenses this year. Just as a little bit of background, we successfully raised $1.8 million in June of 2020, but that was the start of the rainy season. So we have to wait for the rains to subside before we could even start working on these two licenses. And our first drill program on the Nheak license at what's called the Peacock prospect only just finished. We started December 27th, and we've only just finished the first program. So that whole time between June and the end of December, we did a little bit of groundwork, but primarily because of the significant rains this year, we were held back and we weren't able to do the work. So between now and the end of March is really where we're full steam ahead, and we're doing some significant work programs on those two licenses. I also want to just mention, we've traditionally been a project generator. That has been the model that we've followed for so many years. And this year we've done a little bit of a turn. While we still look for strong partnerships, and we continue to do so, and we do have a great partnership with a group out of Alberta called Homie 5 Resources. A lot of the work that we're going to be doing, and I'm going to talk to you today about, is on 100% owned licenses that we do not have partnerships on. So the Andong license, there's 10 distinct epithermal gold anomalies that we're working on. The primary one is called Wild Boar, and we'll get into some details on that shortly. And the other core target for us this work season is a target called the Canada Wall. It's a copper moly gold porphyry, but we're looking at the surrounding gold, epithermal gold targets that surround that porphyry unit. And then the third target is the Peacock target, which is on the Nheak license. Now, this is an interesting target for us. We had a partnership with a group out of Australia called Emerald Resources, and as I mentioned earlier, this is a group that's bringing online a over 1 million ounce deposit, approximately 50 kilometers south of this license. So, the geological environment between their Oakval mine and the Peacock prospect is very similar. Now, the best intercept that they had on this particular target, after drilling 15 holes, they came back with one in particular that was 3.61 grams per ton over 8 meters, which was exciting. What we did is this year we've twinned that hole, and then we stepped out to get a better understanding of the mineralization as a whole. And we're using diamond drilling. So it gives us a core, and it gives us an opportunity to assay some of these results as well. So in the middle of this work program, we've completed drilling. However, now we need to do the work of sample preparation and assaying at the labs. The next target. Oh, did you have any questions specifically?
Yeah, I was just going to say around the assay, have the assay times been okay in Cambodia? Even because I know, Canada has been horrible. Other places have been really bad as well. Has it been good for assay time turnaround?
Exceptionally. We don't have the backlog that North America is seeing right now. So we typically have a turnaround of somewhere between 2 weeks and 3 weeks maximum. So we're able to get our everything squared away and assays back quite quickly. So we're quite fortunate for that.
So you almost don't want to advertise that because you're going to have Canadian CEOs sending their core over to Cambodia to get assay.
It's true. It's fingers crossed.
And one other thing before we get too deep here, you mentioned it earlier, the rainy season. Obviously, there's a drilling season in Canada, and that depends on where you are. Sometimes it's snow conditions, sometimes it's fog, sometimes it's mud. What's the drilling season look like in Cambodia, and what are the limitations? It sounds like rain is the big one.
Rain is definitely the biggest factor. We have worked through a rainy season in the past. We had a relationship with Jogmec out of Japan, and they committed $3 million to working on the Halo prospect, which was a copper porphyry, or is a copper porphyry. And they requested that we work through the rainy season. It certainly presents its challenges. And we typically use the rainy season to log our core and do more housekeeping activities in and around our head office to follow up on all of the work that we get done during the drier seasons. But between sort of a June to October typically timeframe is the rainy seasons in Cambodia. This year, however, rains continued well into November, and we probably saw more rain and accumulation than we've seen in our 12 years in Cambodia. So this year particularly, we were able to get into November, that time frame. We were able to start doing some groundwork, and I'll tell you about that in and around the Wild Boar prospect and Canada Wall prospects. But we've only were really able to safely get our man-portable rigs into the Peacock prospect as of sort of that late December timeframe, especially because it's at a little bit of a higher elevation. So rains have a big influence on our ability to do work for a good third of the year.
So the drilling has already happened at this property. You're waiting on assays, so that would be kind of a near-term catalyst that people can expect some news on in, say, the next 2-3 weeks then?
That's correct.
Okay.
I don't want to get into specific dates because I'm not exactly sure how long it's going to take, but we certainly anticipate seeing some results in due course.
So, and just again, in summary on this was a property that Emerald was working on as I guess, an option partner, and they've kind of transferred it back to you to focus on their mine that you said they're pouring their first gold this year. So that will remain their focus. Do you think there's a chance of them ever coming back to work with you on this property again? Like, what's that relationship like?
It's a great relationship, and I certainly think that there could be a possibility. We remain on very good terms with Emerald. They're a world-class outfit. They do exceptionally strong work, and having seen them go through the entire cycle of identification of an early stage exploration asset, doing all the work, compliant work, and bringing it through to the mining license, and now to see in Q2 of this year, doré being poured, is just, I think, a testament to the industry writ large, and I think it helps us as much as it helps them.
Absolutely.
It's really important to see, I think, internationally, that you can go through that entire cycle in a very short period of time, I might add. Typically in Canada, you see that it takes anywhere between 8 and 10 years from identification of an asset through to mining and production. And it's significantly less in the case of Cambodia, yet they still adhere to international standards. All the environmental and social impact requirements that you would see in Canada are adhered to in Cambodia. So we're very pleased to see them coming online with their first pour in Q2. And I think that there certainly does remain the opportunity for us to work together on the cognac license, and if and when we're able to identify something of significant value.
Okay. So when you say a lot shorter, Stephen, just to qualify that, compared to the 8 to 10 years in Canada, what do you remember what it took for Emerald?
This is off the top of my head, but I think it was around 5 years.
Wow. Okay. So
almost half. It's very quick, and as I said, they adhered to all the expectations that the Cambodian government put in place. And international financiers looked at it and said they've done a great job. So I really do believe that Cambodia has all the prospective geology you'd want to see for other large-scale operations like the Emerald Akvau mine coming and being identified and being brought forward over the years to come, for sure.
Okay. So let's move on to the Wild Boar target. So we brought the slide up here. Some pretty impressive grades.
There certainly is. So Wild Boar is an early stage target for us. We have done very little work outside of surface work No, but you're looking at this map and you're seeing some high grades in the 70 grams per ton range. I just want to point out these are surface samples, these are float samples. But what we have been able to identify through the last 2 ground truthing programs, we had cores out of Korea on the property early in 2020, and they submitted some samples that came back in that sort of 50 gram per ton range. And then we did a follow-up program, and this is where we really were able to identify a much more detailed target. So you'll see from this map that we have 4 specific lengths of target that we're going to be focusing on this upcoming season. And from north to south, that's about 700 meters. So in short order, I'm going to have a group of a team on the ground at the Wild Boar prospect, and we're going to start with pitting and trenching. And we're going to start at the north, and we're going to work our way down to the south. And that is going to, that will give us a really good sense of what we're seeing near surface. And it'll get us to a point where we'll be able to better understand targeting for a drill program. So that's the next step as far as the Wild Boar prospect is concerned. But it's a very interesting target. Needless to say, seeing surface results, consistent surface results like this has definitely got us interested and excited.
Yeah, absolutely. So the timeline on when you would be drilling this, say end of February, does that sound about right? Or
I would hope that by mid to end of February, for sure, we should have a drill rig on site. Yeah.
Okay.
And my goal is to see somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 meters drilled at the Wild Boar prospect.
And you're trenching and pitting this as we speak, or is that soon?
It's just about to begin. So there's a planned program for the Wild Boar prospect. Now that we've finished it down at Peacock, we're moving the team at this point.
Okay. And would you consider Wild Boar sort of the primary target of all your different properties? Is this like the kind of the star of the show?
I would consider Andong as a license, as a whole, the star of the show. We've held it back from partnership since the very beginning. So we've held on to the Wild Boar prospect, or I'm sorry, the Andong license. And it's not just the Wild Boar prospect, but there's 5 other really intriguing gold targets at Andong that we're going to be doing work at. But from our perspective, certainly Wild Boar holds a lot of interest for us, and will be the star for at least this work program.
Okay.
Followed by, as you can see the next slide here, followed by the Canada Wall prospect. And the interesting thing about Canada Wall is, we've done some initial drilling here into the copper porphyry. And it was actually a group of geologists that came up from Freeport that did some work analyzing our initial drill holes here. And it was a really interesting idea, concept, or hypothesis that was presented. And this appears to be an older porphyry that's weathered, and it was originally sort of that copper gold mineralization. And then a younger intrusion came through in the same area, and that deposited copper and moly. So we see very high moly results here. And these around the core of this porphyry, we've identified 9 really interesting epithermal gold targets. So we're going to, we're going to work on 4 or 5 of them this year. We've already shot IP in the area, so that's very helpful. But after we're finished pitting and trenching at Wild Boar, that crew is going to then move over and start doing the same work, pitting and trenching on some of these core gold targets at the Canada Wall. And this year, all of our focus is on the gold targets. Right. We continue to always have interesting conversations with potential strategic partners who are looking for copper, but we're only focusing today on the gold targets.
Okay. And so Peacock, Wild Boar, and Canada Wall, the drilling and trenching, pitting, all those activities that you have planned or are occurring. Yes. Is that all fully funded from the last capital raise you did?
It is. Okay. So we're in a very good position at this stage. We're certainly going to have to look at raising additional capital in the near future. But for all of the work that we have planned and that we've talked about today, it's fully funded. And there's the potential for a lot of news to come out between now and the end of March as a result of these various work programs on 100% owned licenses.
Yeah, investors love catalysts too, and news flow. Obviously, the news flow is the lifeblood of exploration. So, obviously, if you're watching today, watching this video today, if you're interested in what you're hearing so far, there will be some news coming over the next couple of months that you can help digest and help make your decision on whether you take a position or not. Stephen, I did want to mention, I know you mentioned it earlier that Angkor has been sort of a prospect generator in the past, and I know there's one specific NSR you have with a group called Mesco, right?
That's correct.
Talk about that.
So the Mesco story is an interesting one. If in 2013 we sold a 12 square kilometer area to an Indian firm called Mesco. And they quickly went through the development of all of their appropriate licensing requirements. So they did their social and environmental impact assessments, and they got through to the acquisition of a mining license. And throughout that process, they were building infrastructure on the ground. So the Phum Syarung mine is an interesting one. It's a stacked vein system that pinches and swells. And so far, Mesco has built out 3 levels to their mine. There's a head frame in place. There's 2 declines. There's a vertical shaft. But they have yet to produce any gold doré because their production model hasn't been put in place. Now, the last 24 months, there's been a number of different reasons for some delays. Of course, health concerns over the last year and others. But we're very confident that they're going to be moving this thing forward towards production. Now, the company holds a sliding scale NSR, so from 2 to 7.5%, depending on the price of gold. So at $1,800 gold, we actually have a 6% NSR on this production. So we're really keen to see them bring their mine online. But it's very difficult. Near impossible for me to speak to the value of that NSR because unfortunately we haven't seen 43-101 or JORC compliant reporting. Mm-hmm. So I'm not able to speak to grade or head grade or expectations of resource. It's simply not understood well enough for me to be able to articulate for your audience what the value of that NSR is, at least as of today. So our hope is, in short order, they're going to be bringing this thing forward, and I certainly, myself and our team, are very keen to see that happen. So we'll keep you posted for sure.
Yeah, it's pretty nice as an exploration company if you have that cash flow coming in. Usually, all you do is spend money. But you have the cash flow coming in. It helps with drilling operations. I mean, that is the benefit, I guess, of the project generator model. So,
absolutely, we would love to see that happen, and we'll be working. That would be a very nice cash flow, as you say, to support operational activities. So we're keen to see it happen.
Okay. So let's pivot a little bit to the oil and gas side. So we've covered the gold, I think, fairly well. So the other side of the company is exploration for oil and gas. So unpack this for us a bit.
Sure.
Yeah.
So without taking too much of the time of your audience, we started looking at the potential of oil and gas in Cambodia 7 years ago. And this is another example of how you have oil and gas production all around Cambodia. And only this past year in late December did Cambodia become an oil producing country. So offshore, there was a group out of Singapore called Chris Energy, and they brought their oil platform online at the end of December, which is a huge milestone for the country. So happy that Cambodia can now call itself an oil producing country, because the potential is there. There's no doubt about it. And as I mentioned earlier, the geology does not respect borders. So when you look to the north of Cambodia, at the Thai border, there's something called the Korat Basin, and there's 23 TCF of gas in place there. All of the majors have operations. It's a world-class asset. To the east, in Vietnam, offshore Vietnam, just identified a new oil and gas basin. And you've got groups like SR bidding $11 billion to build out the infrastructure required to take advantage of that oil basin. And then to the west, you've got the Gulf of Thailand on the Thai side, which has been in operations for over 40 years. So it's exciting times. It's early. We have the right to acquire what's called Block 8. I was in Cambodia in March of 2020 in the midst of production sharing contract negotiations when health concerns came out, and the decision was to put those negotiations on hold, and we returned back to Canada. I hope that those negotiations can resume in March of this year. And once the production sharing contract has been negotiated and completed, we then acquire the right to Block 8. Without getting into too many specifics about the geology, it's exciting for a number of reasons, and we could probably spend an entire session talking just about oil and gas.
Yeah.
But it's basically a four-land basin, and for your audience, Alberta is a four-land basin. It's the simplest way to describe it. You've got mountain ranges and sedimentary layer, and as long as you have source and porosity and permeability of rock and the right heat, that's what creates these traps of hydrocarbons. And we believe that Cambodia is perfectly situated to have those pieces of the puzzle in place. And it was just recently that the Danish Geological Survey did some work offshore that kind of was the missing piece and that fell into place for us, that allowed us to finally say, aha, the light's on, it's time, we know where we want to go. And that basically was a single shallow stratigraphic hole that was drilled on Peacock Island, which is due south of where we are at Block 8. And it came back within the oil window. And that was the missing piece. We thought maybe it was only potential for gas in country, but we've really changed that opinion, and we think that yet again we might be rewriting the books, and we might be looking at the possibility of liquid hydrocarbons on Block 8, where we're seeing over 30 different cases of oil seeps at surface. So it's exciting, but it's very early stages.
Okay. So yeah, early stages, but very interesting, could provide some real potential blue sky, for the company, obviously, if it pans out. Is there a lot of other people exploring for oil and gas in Cambodia on the land-based?
Onshore, we're the only ones currently who have access to an oil block. So it puts us in a pretty special place. Yeah. So when I'm out having conversations with potential strategic investments or partners, investors or partners, it's a nice point to have when you're having these conversations, because there are not many countries in the world where there hasn't been a single drill hole put in onshore, where you have so much production around the borders of Cambodia, but no one has actually drilled at depth onshore. So now we're the only ones there currently. I'm under no pretense or that we'll be the only ones for very long. I think now that they're producing oil offshore, I do believe that there will certainly be other players that are going to come knocking on the door to try and acquire oil concessions. It's a massive land package. It's 7,300 square kilometers, and fortunately, we have the right to a second license too if we decide to move forward.
Oh, interesting. And, I imagine based on just where it is geographically, Cambodia, there's going to be a lot of demand for oil and energy just from neighboring countries, let alone Cambodia wanting to produce its own oil and gas.
Absolutely. It's a great point, John. Cambodia imports everything. And energy security is of paramount importance to the government. So seeing oil production in country has been a priority of this government for years. And they're very supportive of companies like ourselves being at the forefront of that wave. There's plans for refinery capacity to be built out in country, both to support the onshore as well as offshore future production. But they need it in country first and foremost. So there's going to be a very willing marketplace in country to start with. And then if we're so fortunate as to identify enough to start exporting, then there certainly is a ready-made network or neighborhood, I should say, in India, China, Japan, Korea. All are looking for access to oil and gas, as well as precious metals and base metals. So the neighborhood is very strong. If you're a young country with lots of potential, and a company like ourselves that's looking to tap into that otherwise unknown potential, so we're very excited by it.
Okay, and yeah, like you mentioned earlier, Stephen, I think this oil side of the business deserves its own interview. So we'll do a deeper dive into this for anyone. But maybe one last question. Assuming that the production sharing agreement that you're negotiating or looking to negotiate in March, assuming that happens and you'd be ready to start, exploration activities, how would you be looking to fund that? Because oil and gas, I know the costs of, drilling and whatnot are quite high. Is there a private sub in place? Okay.
Absolutely. So the way that we've done it is we decided that we would establish a private subsidiary as a Singaporean subsidiary. It's called Enercam Resources, and it owns the rights to Block 8. So the plan is that the parent company of Angkor Resources will always hold interest within that private sub. But as you rightly pointed out, it's really expensive to explore in the oil and gas sector. So without an understanding of all of those components that go into, especially the very first deep hole, we need to have a partner, a strategic investor with the understanding, the means, and the experience. So I'm actively looking and having conversations with appropriate groups around the world, from the Middle East into Asia and elsewhere. And those groups are all looking at the excitement of what this opportunity presents. But it was really important that we structure a little bit differently, because the dollar figures required just to get to those early stage wins are significantly higher than on the hard rock side. So you're spot on. We've structured it so that it has the ability to fund privately and then also have a life of its own if warranted. So we can easily spin this aspect of the business out if and when it's necessary. But I just a quick highlight, we have a separate team in place from geophysicists and geologists, specifically with experience in the oil and gas sector, led by Dr. Lauren Rosenthal, who's got 40 years experience in the Alberta oil patch. He's been with us for 7 years, and he's been the one leading the charge in developing this theory around what the potential of Cambodia could hold. And he's our VP of exploration on the Enercam side, so that we'll have two separate teams leading both hard rock asset exploration as well as oil and gas exploration.
Okay. Yeah, that makes total sense. I mean, obviously very different approaches and certainly on cost side. So yeah, the oil side is very interesting to me. It represents sort of that carrot. If it works out, the potential upside is pretty big on top of what you have on the hard rock side. So let's pivot a little bit and talk capital structure, where I think we've reviewed the assets. In your investor deck, it mentions that you've got, I think, a group between management and close insiders and investors that holds about 50% of the shares. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Absolutely. So within management, I think the most important group to talk about is Mike and Delane Weeks. They are our founders, and they've been, they've been a huge supporter of this company in its direction since day one. And they're the single largest shareholders in the company. And they come by that shareholdings very honestly. They've paid for every single share. They've invested north of $5 million into the company over the years.
Wow.
And it's their network that was the core shareholder base of the private co back in 2008 through to 2011. And those core shareholders are still our core shareholders today. So we've been very lucky to have well-heeled oil service families as our core shareholders, and it's been a bit of a double-edged sword. So when we've needed to go out and raise a little bit of capital, whether it be raising $1 million here or there, there's always been a willingness to participate. That's great, but at the same time, we have always had a knock against us that as a result of that close and shareholder base, there's never been a lot of trading activity. And when I came on board as CEO, I've always had a goal of trying to really expand on that trading activity, because I think a healthy company is not only a financeable company, but I think shareholders should have the ability to buy and sell when they need to. So you need to have a healthy marketplace. And especially recently, we've engaged in an investor relations campaign, a marketing campaign, working with groups like yourselves and others. It's about finding that new audience, about telling a story that needs a little bit more context to really understand it. But it's an interesting story, and it's an exciting jurisdiction with exceptional geology. And I think it's really started to have a positive effect. And you could look at our trading activity. Just in the last 3 months, I think we've traded north of 20 million shares. And you could look at the previous 12 months, and we traded that same amount. So I think that we're doing something right, and I want to see it increase. I want to see more of this. And I really am looking forward to expanding our shareholder base outside of just that core group, which is wonderful to have. And they've been so exceptionally supportive of us. But it's time for everybody to hear more about what this Angkor Resources story has to offer. And that's a big goal of mine. So yes, about 50% of the outstanding shares are in closed hands, which means that with 149 million shares outstanding currently, we probably have some 70 million in closed hands and another 70 million out there as a trading float. So I think we're in a great spot to take advantage of all this news flow and hopefully some really good results.
Yeah, so I brought the stock chart up, and I mean, you can definitely see within the last 3 to 4 months, there's an increase in liquidity, and I guess that does kind of correspond with when the hold period came off of your last financing that you did, I believe, in June of 2020. So I'm guessing there's some sort of correlation there. So Stephen, you've mentioned doing some IR initiatives and marketing initiatives, all I think very important when it comes to, it's just like advertising a company. If people don't know you exist, it's hard for them to spend money at your store. Yeah. Same thing with, investing in your company. If they don't know you exist, it's hard for them to buy shares. Here, the stock chart obviously shows some challenges, from the share price side. What are some of your ideas around turning this around? Do you think the focus or the push on marketing and IR right now will help get that done?
I certainly hope it will help, but I think what's most important, John, is that we show results. I mean, this is not meant to be a promote. We have never been that company, and I don't want us to be that company. I want us to be able to tell a story of our hard work resulting in good results, if not exceptional results. So we've been in this country now for 12 years for a reason, because we've committed to it and we understand it intimately. And I believe that what's going to change our trajectory as far as the share price is concerned is, yes, talking to new investors. And I think the market in general is accepting of the idea that marketing is important and investor relations is important. And I have a great Rolodex, but I want to expand it. But I also think that what's going to change our trajectory and move us forward is going to be results. So a tremendous amount of work going into the next 3 months with lots of results coming out. So my hope is that the market appreciates it and sees that there's great potential in these, particularly these 3 gold targets of Peacock, Wild Boar, and Canada Wall's epithermal potential, gold potential. So I think that that's really what's going to make a big difference in our trajectory on the markets.
Yeah, and again, I talked about it earlier, but I think it's worth saying again, the fact that you are in Cambodia, if you had some of the, the gold showings that you've shown so far, for example, at Wild Boar, I know it's early days, but, if you were in Canada, you start, getting float samples at 70 grams per ton gold, or if you had sort of the oil potential that you have now, there'd already be a lot of interest, and attention in the stock. So this, the fact that you're in Cambodia is an opportunity, I guess, for people to sort of get in on something that's maybe less known, a little more hidden, just strictly because of where it is in the world.
I appreciate the comments. I echo that. I do believe that is the case, and I think that we are well positioned to be able to take advantage of that. But we don't have the luxury of being in the Golden Triangle or whatever example you want to use, Kirkland or whatever it is. These well-known jurisdictions in the Canadian context. But I think what really is important to point out is that we can show that if you can find the assets, you can bring them through the full cycle through to production in short order in a way that you simply can't do in Canada today. So you could adhere to all the international standards. You could build strong, positive relationships and be able to bring assets through that cycle and bring them online in a time frame that is remarkable for the worldwide gold and as well as oil and gas production.
Okay. It is fresh into the new year. 2020 had its challenges for a lot of companies and people in general. It's a very challenging year with the worldwide health situation. Looking into 2021, what are you most excited about?
Oh, I certainly am looking forward to these results. I mean, this is going to be, I think, a monumental time frame for the company. The work that we're doing on these 100% owned licenses without partners' direction, I think is going to be fundamental to the development of the company. And I think it's just the starting point. So we've got, based on these results, we have significant plans for round 2, and then obviously as directed by the results. But we certainly have lots on the horizon, not just in these 3 targets, but I could say I'm just as excited about the next 3 on our list as well. So we continue to have a very significant land package in country, and we do look to finding additional partners. But I think that the catalysts will include seeing Emerald producing will be beneficial for our industry writ large. The results that will come out of the various work programs on the Peacock, Wild Boar, and Canada Wall prospects, and then looking to an appreciation in the marketplace, and me getting out and the opportunity to speak with yourself and others, I think all bode well for the company into 2021.
And lastly, Stephen, is the strategy around capital? I know you said you'd be looking to raise capital, in the first half of this year. Will you be looking to do that after your results are out, or would it be kind of depending on if the price moves in the right direction and someone's to offer you, the right terms? Would you take it before the results are out?
Oh, I certainly am always willing to work with the opportunities that present themselves, but I think it's probably realistic that March-April timeframe is when we'll be assessing the markets to see when and if we are going to move forward with another raise. If the markets have appreciated, perhaps there's an opportunity to bring some of these warrants through, because there's a significant number of warrants that were associated with the last raise. So if we've appreciated enough, perhaps we can action those to generate some fundraising. But I have always believed that optionality is everything when you're building out a company. As a young junior like ourselves, a micro cap, you've got to keep everything on the table and look at what opportunities present themselves if and when they do. So the sky is the limit. You got to be nimble. Absolutely.
Nimble. Okay, well, Stephen, this has been great. Been really interesting to meet you, to learn about your company. I certainly learned a lot. I hope those that are watching today have as well. And I'm very much looking forward to having you back on soon to do a deeper dive on the hard rock assets and on the on the oil side of things. So until then,
thank you.
Yeah, be well, stay safe.
Thanks so much, John. It's great to meet you, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from any questions that your audience might have. Easy to contact me. My cell and phone number is at the bottom of every press release, as well as my email address. So easily accessible, and would welcome any questions that might come up. And I certainly am looking forward to the deeper dives into the hard rock as well as the oil and gas side of things.
Perfect. Okay. Thanks again, Stephen. Take care. Cheers.
Thank you very much, John. Have a great day.